Newly unsealed autopsy reports and the brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students reveal the harrowing final moments. Investigators say the killer stabbed Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin more than 100 times. These new details showing the horror of the night, the violence of the night, and the evil within the killer. Tonight, we will go through all this new information and ask the question, why didn't prosecutors seek the death penalty for this monster? I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments, and we've got some new material to show you from the Idaho 4 case. And let me tell you, worse than we thought. And we thought the worst of this guy. But could you imagine that the information as it's coming out, revealing a scene inside that home that you can't imagine, the attack on these 4 young people and what they were subjected to. Unreal. We've got the details for you tonight. Horrific bloodshed in that house. This was kill, this was overkill, this was, I mean, the picture that's painted in my mind tonight is a sort of a manic episode where this guy just has the adrenaline going through the roof and is just taking it out on the next person that he sees. And once you hear these details, you're going to be really surprised that he did not go after Dylan. Because remember, Dylan sees him. I don't know if he sees her, but amazing that in light of what we're learning now, that 2 people were spared in that house. Now, the other part of this, once you hear and you'll get the details of all this horror, the prosecutor gave him a deal. I cannot get over this. I still cannot get over this. And the reason being, it is a state that has the death penalty. And if you don't seek it against this guy, then who would wait till you hear the details. Who else would be eligible for this? This is who it's designed for. But the prosecutor gave him a deal. And that's why I always ask the question, did they get justice? And you can say, well, some of the families didn't want the death penalty. At the end of the day, should the worst of the worst be punished the most severe? At the end of the day, in a state that has the death penalty, meaning the people of that state elected people into office who put that on the books, which means the people want it in that state. But you're not giving it to him, so is that truly justice? We could talk about that, but first let's dive into some of these new details and to help us understand the findings from the autopsies. I want to bring in forensic death investigator, host of the very popular Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Thanks so much for being here. This is going to be a tough...
Of course, fan.
This is going to be a tough little segment, but I brought you in because you understand these death scenes. You can put some context and perspective for us. So I want to start with Xana, and let me read some of the stuff, and then you can kind of break it down for us. Cause of death: multiple sharp force injuries, while also suffering abrasions and contusion of the head, torso, and extremities. Awake at the time of the attack. 67 stab wounds, 25 incised wounds of the upper extremities, 23 stab and incised wounds of the scalp, face, and neck, 7 stab wounds of the chest, 4 stab wounds of the abdomen, 3 incised and puncture wounds of the back, 5 incised wounds of the lower extremities, punctures of the outer table of the skull, perforations of the jugular vein, heart, lung, and pulmonary blood vessels, hemorrhage into the chest cavities, wounds extending into the bones of the right hand, scrapes and bruises on the face, torso, and extremities, blood on the bottoms of her feet. Joseph Scott Morgan, what story is this telling about what happened to Xana?
Well, let's start with the feet. Ben. I know that seems rather innocuous, but that gives us evidence that she was upright and mobile, at least for a few moments, that she fought. You don't get this contact trace blood elements on the feet without that having occurred. And then we move to the hands. This is evidence of an awareness, because these sound to me, at least, Finn, as though these are consistent with defensive wounds. So she's parrying any kind of attack like this back, trying to block. She's awake and alert at that moment in time. And then you begin to get into all of these other planes of the body that are insulted. So it's not as though that the perpetrator is merely advancing on her face to face. She's whirling about, okay, because you've got insults posteriorly, anteriorly. You've got them on multiple surfaces of the skull and the face. And it's not just sharp force injuries, Finn. They talk about incised wounds, which are slices. You have stab wounds, which are penetrative wounds. But then she's also got bruises or contusions, which means we're talking about, in addition to all of this, blunt force trauma. You mentioned a term earlier that I've heard you mention for many years, and I concur with this. This is, in fact, overkill. This is a frenzied event. I can't necessarily go to motivation, but I can tell you, Vin, that cases like this that I've worked over the years, this goes to being fueled by intense anger, fear, all of these sort of things. And if we believe what the narrative is that we've heard over and over, Xana was that kind of, she was that individual that stood between him and getting clear of this environment. He did not expect to encounter her. So he's like a caged animal, with emphasis on animal here, Vin.
Let's get to our next victim, Kaylee Goncalves. Cause of death: multiple sharp force injuries, while also suffering asphyxial injuries and blunt force injuries of the head. Stabbed a minimum of 38 times. 24 stab and incised wounds of the scalp, face, and neck. 11 stab and incised wounds of the chest. 3 stab and incised wounds of the upper extremities. Punctures of the outer table of the skull. Injuries to the teeth and tongue. Perforations of the subclavian artery and vein, and hemorrhage into the chest cavities. Blunt force injuries, scalp laceration, bleeding around the brain, nasal fracture, scrapes on the nose and cheeks, bruising around the eyes, patterned bruises extending across the lower face, blood stains on the body, bed, and wall indicate her posture and position changed during this event. What story does this tell about Kaylee?
When you think about this child, then let's just go to, because I know a lot of people are curious about this idea of the external table of the skull. And the external table of the skull, there's a top layer to the skull, if you will. So this is a non-penetrative injury to the skull itself. So what this means is, with the utilization of this blade, and keep in mind, this K-bar blade is very robust. At its heart, this is a combat knife, okay? Very resilient, very robust. So if you think about the blade itself kind of glancing off of the skull itself, it will in fact chip that external or outer table of the skull every time that this occurs. Then we begin to think about the hemorrhage that you see inside of the cranial vault. That's because of this concussive event where she's being pummeled. There's a lot of this pummeling that's going on here, because the knife and a fist, or the fist wrapped around a knife, he's essentially doing this and then driving the blade, I think, into her face. And if anybody gets a chance to look at the K-bar, if you flip it on its end and you look at the base of this thing, it actually looks like a hammer Okay, and that's what Marines have used this thing for. It's not just a combat knife, but it's a utility knife. So it can be used as a bludgeon. It's fascinating when they begin to talk. Did you notice what you had mentioned? If you go back to that, they talked about a pattern, the pattern injuries. Well, if you have a pattern injury, that means that it marries up with some type of object, right? And my suspicion is that during this kind of blunt force trauma, you've got these patterns that are appearing on the face. And one more thing about this poor young lady is that you said there were a minimum of wounds. Do you know why they're saying that instead of being specifically qualifying there? Because you have intermingled wounds that are communicating with one another. And so even in the autopsy room, when you're trying to make sense of what you're seeing, you'll have cross communications between insults, and sometimes you cannot accurately count them. This is a very concentrated attack all over her. She had an awareness. We think about being in a recumbent position, maybe prone or supine. As she's sleeping, she reacts. She rises to this. So the attitude that she's in physically is adjusting relative to the attacker.
All right, let's go to Kaylee's best friend, Madison Mogen. Cause of death: multiple sharp force injuries, 13 stabbed and incised wounds to the scalp, face, and neck, 10 incised wounds of the upper extremities, 5 stab wounds of the chest, wounds to the lung and liver, perforations of the subclavian vein, subclavian artery, and blood vessels of the chest wall, an incision of the nasal septum, and a perforation of the tongue. One other thing, if you could give us your opinion on, does any of this give you any indication of who may have been murdered first?
Not, you do that at your own peril, and any forensic pathologist or medical legal death investigator out there would say the same thing. All we can merely do is give you an indication of the number of insults that have occurred, the level of trauma. It's very, very difficult to put this in order. I wish we could so desperately, but we can't. It's almost an empirical impossibility to do that. Maddie's injuries are unique to her in the sense that you begin to think about, if you touch the underside of your nose, this is your septum right here. So she's got an incised injury that literally goes across this area, clips the nasal septum, as it will. So the blade is literally being drug across her face at this point in time. She's also, again, this facial attack that's going on. And I've thought about this a lot, Vin, in the sense that I think that one of the 2 young ladies in that room were the target. Obviously, I think that's been talked about extensively. I know that you have, and so have I. But when you combine the level of trauma that both Maddie and Kaylee have sustained inside of this environment, this is almost an effort to disfigure. That's why I think that upon the initial event, when the perpetrator entered into this room, first off, I think this is probably sexually motivated. I think there's an adrenaline dump because this is driven by his lust. I think he's surprised when he gets in there because there's 2. So now you're heaping on top of that adrenaline dump. You've got fear and anger that are coming in, and he just goes wild in this environment and begins stabbing them repeatedly over and over and over again. He very well could have gone from body to body. Okay, and that has happened over the course of my career. I've seen that occur. There would be DNA evidence on that knife where you would have commingled DNA, I think, probably, and on other surfaces, of course. We don't know where that knife is. Lord only knows. I hope it's found at some point in time, but we don't have it. Both of these girls were extremely disfigured and attacked, whereas if you think about Xana, her wounds are more randomized. They're over multiple planes. These two victims, you have this kind of concentration where he's really focused on the face here, Vin.
Final victim, Ethan Chapin, 6 incised wounds of the upper extremities, 6 stab and incised wounds of the lower extremities, 4 stab and incised wounds of the scalp, face, and neck, 1 stab wound of the upper chest, perforations of the jugular vein, subclavian vein, and subclavian artery.
Yeah. So what stands out to me about Ethan's injuries, specifically the concentration is up here. For folks that are wondering where the subclave is, if you'll find your clavicle, your collarbone right here, the subclavicular clavicle runs beneath there. It's a major blood supply. So you're going to have a lot of internal bleeding with this. It doesn't seem as though that Ethan really moved from the position that he was in. But one thing that's always struck me as odd with Ethan, and I think you probably know where I'm going, Vin, are these insults that he has on his lower extremities. They seem to be incised wounds, and I don't, and look, in the heat of the moment, maybe the confined space in here, you can't explain it because you've got somebody that's reacting in anger, but in that concentration, they're that low on the body. I've never been able to make sense of it or what the purpose of that was. And of course, I don't think that we will ever know that, but Ethan certainly is traumatized to a great extent as well. There is not as much facial disfiguration with him. I don't think that the perpetrator spent as much time in his efforts to kill Ethan as he did the others.
Joseph Scott Morgan, your insight is the best, and really, I think, gives us all a much clearer understanding of what happened here to these 4 victims, and we appreciate your time tonight. Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you.
You're quite welcome, my friend.
All right, let's bring in our think tank. Joining us tonight, criminal defense attorney, former head New Jersey County prosecutor Bob Bianchi, along with former police lieutenant, trial attorney Rick King, and finally, national parenting and family relationship expert, Dr. Sue Kornbluth. Okay, here's my question I'll throw out to everyone, which is the way this all ended was with a deal. The man who did all the damage that Joseph Scott Morgan just went through, and what these 4 children, they're young adults, but from my perspective, they're children. The suffering, the pain, the wounds, the evilness of what happened and what took place here. He got a deal. And this isn't a debate of the death penalty. Idaho has it. It's on the books. Bob, why don't you start us off?
Well, Vinny, as a guy who's actually done death penalty litigation, and I'm not a fan of the death penalty, but I've been there. And one of the reasons I'm against the death penalty is because of the chaotic way in which it's administered and not administered. Random decisions by prosecutors to pursue it or not. Yet, when it was the law in the state of New Jersey, it's no longer. I understood that I took an oath that I had to follow the law, not Bob Bianchi's opinion, but what the law says. Now, as you indicated, this state has a death penalty, and this is exactly the reason I'm against it. If not the Kohberger case, then what case? How is it fair to be putting people on the death penalty for far less egregious murder cases? This is literally sadistic murder, multiple victims, a very solid case in the guilt phase. No doubt in my mind, a conviction in the penalty phase. If the death penalty has a picture of what case it is, it's the Kohberger case. So not only did the prosecution cave in giving it away, Vinny, I think you know me well enough to know, even if I felt I was going to lose, I'd rather fight the battle and lose rather than to give it away. You're going to have to take it from me. But they weren't going to lose. And the second and last point that I've got to make with regard to this is the prosecutor offers this deal without requiring the defendant to debrief fully and truthfully the reasons, what fors, wherefores, how come, and motive. He lets the families now have to just kind of figure it out and kind of see this stuff happening over and over again, not really understanding why. I almost think it's excuse me, but like some sort of emotional breakdown happened with the decision maker on this case, because there is no legal explanation in all the years I've done it. if there was a case that I would pursue for the death penalty, and I'm not a fan of it, it's this one.
I mean, for me, Vinny, I could not imagine, I could not understand for the life of me why this was not a death penalty case. I mean, this was obviously one of the worst kinds of ways to murder these beautiful young students, and it was full of so much rage and passion. Like he had an agenda to just take out whatever was going on inside of him, and just take it out on these innocent young ladies and gentlemen. And it's just so brutal that I can't imagine why this would not be a death penalty case. I mean, isn't this what the death penalty is all about?
So, Vinny, first of all, let me say this. Like Bob, and for Bob's reasons and many more, I'm also not a death penalty advocate. And I thought I heard that you earlier. I thought I heard you say that some of the family was against it, and in some ways I can understand that, because what they want is they want fast finality, and they want to avoid the craziness of the appellate process when it comes to the death penalty. I will tell you that listening to the doctor speak or the forensic investigator speak about what that was, very difficult. Despite all my experiences, still very, very difficult to listen to, and my heart goes out to that family. But maybe, and in here in Florida, we have the Marcy's Law, where the victim gets they get a lot of input as to what happens at the conclusion of cases.
No.
And so
no.
Here, I'm sorry. So here,
sorry, Rick. That's why the indictments read the state of such and such versus the victims have rights to be heard. They don't have rights to direct the case. I get it. I know what it's like to bring victims through a trauma like that, but you have an obligation to follow the law, Rick. I'm sorry. The victim's opinions make a difference, but that's even disputed in this particular case. And
well, it was split. It was split 2-2.